These are my 10 favourite moments from the mainline Resident Evil series, listed in order of how much I enjoyed them and ending with my favourite. That this first one has to be on the list at all is not a particularly palatable prospect, but it's so well known not just by series fans but gamers in general that it has to be acknowledged. Resident Evil 5 is not a subtle game, it's not Resident Evil 6, which is pure, unadulterated nonsense, but it's fairly bonkers nonetheless. Whether it's the absurdly enormous BOWs, Albert Wesker completing his transition to pantomime villain, or black market bioweapons dealer Ricardo Irvine, never more than a few minutes pass without something wacky unfolding.
Splendid timing! You two are just in time for the fireworks show! Boom!
But there is one moment wackier than all the others. If television and film have the term jumping the shark for when a series has gone too far off the deep end, then surely punching a boulder should be the term used to describe similar in video game terms. While battling Wesker in the mouth of a volcano, which is already a bit much, protagonist Chris Redfield needs to clear a path for his partner Sheva Alomar, with there apparently being only one incredibly stupid solution.
Wherever you go, everywhere, nothing but loathsome humans.
It's a scene which left many holding their heads in their hands, but equally, it's hard not to chuckle at just how madcap the whole thing is. By this point, Resident Evil was already clinging on to what little sense of seriousness it had left, and Chris's Boulder-based escapades are a monument to how dramatically the series' tone had shifted. Whether you find it hilarious or depressing, or both in equal measure, it's hard to deny that it cemented itself as one of the series' most popular moments. Next, another Chris Redfield-centric moment, the last one, I promise. Let's be honest, much of Wesker's storyline throughout the Resident Evil series has been pretty silly. It started out very well indeed. His betrayal of Stars towards the end of the original might not have been hugely surprising, but it was effective, and his death at the hands of Tyrant was a very cool moment in and of itself.
It's magnificent.
However, the further the series has progressed, the more outlandish it quickly became. Resident Evil Code Veronica may only be Wesker's second appearance in the series, but he definitely leaves a lasting impression after his leave of absence. It's not his re-emergence as a villain that I love the most. In actuality, I don't think it's handled as well as it could have been, but his scenes with Chris, in particular the one in which we realise Wesker may no longer be entirely human, are awesome.
You destroyed my plans, so now I've sold my soul to a new organization. Now, die.
The pair cross paths a few more times during the story, but none of those meetings, or many other scenes in the series as a whole honestly, spark the same sense of intrigue for me as the reveal of Wesker's creepy new eyes. With Resident Evil 4's remake he made a return of sorts, and I hope him dabbling with a virus and gaining superpowers isn't cut from any future reworks, even if it doesn't exactly fit the tone. Next up is one of the most famous frights in gaming. For a title released during a period when video game developers were only just beginning to find their footing creating 3D experiences, Resident Evil is remarkable. Just look at the series' recent remakes, 2's especially. Their visuals may be vastly improved, the blood, guts and gore more graphic, but at their core they still utilise most of the same mechanics Capcom first introduced in 1996. Where Resident Evil has lost some of its bite over time is in its scares, with its distinctly polygonal graphics a far cry from the nightmarish imagery featured in modern games. That wasn't always the case, however. Anyone who played Resident Evil back in the day will surely shudder when they're reminded of the L-shaped hallway you visit early on, and the jump scare within it. It was at that precise moment, as dogs burst through windows and I fumbled to defend myself, heart in mouth, that I realised Resident Evil really did mean business. There are plenty more jump scares throughout the series one might argue were similarly effective, but none were perhaps as terrifying as its first. Many fans of the older, horror-focused side of Resident Evil will have no doubt breathed an almighty sigh of relief as they began their journey through 7's Baker House. After 3 games which mostly ditched the scares, exploration and puzzle solving in favour of action, linearity, and a sense that the series had lost its way, it seemed as if Capcom had finally decided to change direction again. Those first few minutes exploring the dilapidated residence you spend the majority of the first third of the game in are some of my fondest in recent memory. Resident Evil 7 railroads you heavily towards its start, with carefully choreographed fights in tight corridors aplenty. But then you reach the house's main hallway and everything opens up. It's a brilliant mixture of old and new. In terms of its layout, it shares much in common with the Spencer Mansion, and it's the same story when it comes to puzzling too, with some, such as the shotgun brain teaser, being very familiar. At the same time, it feels like a fresh experience thanks to the first-person perspective and the irrepressible Jack Baker constantly attempting to hunt you down.
Heck of a thing, ain't it? Sure shit beats the hell out of dying.
After the mess that was Resident Evil 6, there were plenty who were ready to give up on a series which had become but a shadow of its former self. Thankfully, Capcom was able to combine forward thinking with a reverence for the past, in the process fashioning something amazing. So much of the game is tremendous, but for me, nothing matches those first steps out into the Baker house and the realization that Resident Evil had returned to its roots. Resident Evil Village is a veritable hodgepodge of ideas from start to finish. One moment you're being stalked by a near 10-foot tall, clawed woman, the next fleeing from a giant mutated fish or fighting half-man, half-machine monsters. There is a particular section in Village which stands out more than any of those just mentioned, however, and that is House Beneviento. Making your way towards the home of Donna Beneviento, a woman who communicates via a creepy talking doll, main character Ethan Winters begins to suffer from hallucinations.
Everyone leaves me. Even Rose. I don't want to be alone.
This can't be real.
And by the time he arrives at the house and enters the basement, all bets are off. There is no combat whatsoever until the very end of this section, with puzzle solving instead being the focus. A life-size doll lies in the middle of the central room, one which presumably represents Ethan's dead wife Mia, with you needing to examine parts of it to find objects or clues required to advance. As you progress with the doll puzzle, you unlock new areas containing their own riddles, with proceedings continuing to get more and more unsettling until eventually this happens. It's not an overly original proposition. Silent Hill's teaser, PT, was clearly a huge influence in many ways, some obvious, some less so, but nevertheless it's a spine-tingling affair which leaves a lasting impression, continuing long enough that Capcom has time to foster acute feelings of uncertainty, but not so long that it outstays its welcome. It's near perfectly paced, although a weak boss fight of sorts to round things out and diminished impact during subsequent playthroughs are reasonable criticisms. Judging a sequence like House Beneviento based on initial impressions though, it's hard not to walk away extremely impressed. For a lot of people, the answer to the question, what do you remember most about Resident Evil 2's remake, is going to be the arrival of Mr. X, a hulking, hat-wearing abomination who hounds you for a good chunk of your time spent in the Raccoon City Police Department. He is a malevolent presence like no other, his footsteps enough to strike fear into the hearts of even the most hardened gamers. Just how oppressive a presence he is came as a surprise to many. Mr. X, of course, appears regularly in the original Resident Evil 2 during Claire or Leon's B scenarios, and while he does have a few tricks up his sleeve, him crashing through a couple of walls being perhaps the most infamous, he is generally easy to avoid. Other than a climactic battle with him, you can usually just leave whichever area he appears in and the job's a good un, he won't give chase at all. Not so in the remake. While his first appearance occurs in the same hallway it did in the original, there is no way of making a quick escape this time around.
Jesus Christ!
He will follow you almost anywhere, bar a few select places and safe rooms, and he is relentless in his pursuit. An argument could be made that Resident Evil has begun to rely too heavily on stalker segments in recent years, and I'd be inclined to agree, but among the many, Mr. X is the best of the bunch. The only thing worse than a zombie is a zombie who won't stay dead, and that is a statement Capcom decided to take to heart during their work on Resident Evil's 2001 remake. In general, a lot of the upgrades over the original involved improving existing features, better graphics, more areas to explore, extra characters and the like, all welcome additions which didn't fundamentally alter the Resident Evil formula. The introduction of Crimson Heads, on the other hand, did just that. Once you've reached a certain point early on, you'll pass this long-dead zombie who will rise again out of the blue and scare the living daylights out of you. It's a wonderfully distressing moment. Moving forward, any zombie you've killed needs to be burned using kerosene and a lighter if you want them to stay killed, except for when you manage to blow their heads off, which is enough to put them down permanently. There's nowhere close to enough resources to take out every zombie either, so you'll need to choose which you get rid of wisely. It's an ingenious twist on tried and tested gameplay, with the suddenness of its introduction a masterstroke. There is a second beautifully executed jump scare in Resident Evil many will remember, not just for the moment everything descends into chaos, but because of the story attached to it. During your travels, you'll likely enter this bedroom and get a fright as you try to read a file. The Keeper's Diary tells the tale of an unnamed Umbrella employee, likely the man who burst from the closet, and the events which unfolded around him as the outbreak began. It starts out coherently enough, talking about a game of poker the man had with friends, including Scott the security guard, but it gets darker and darker the more you read. Reaching the penultimate entry, it turns out he succumbed to infection and killed and ate Scott, with the final passage simply reading, "4, itchy, tasty." During most Resident Evils, the monsters you kill during moment-to-moment gameplay are little more than cannon fodder, obstacles to be avoided, their existence pre-infection irrelevant. Every so often, though, you'll find a file which gives you insights into the lives of those unfortunate enough to be caught up in the carnage, and while they may seem relatively inconsequential, for me they're a huge part of the series' appeal. The Keeper's Diary is the first stunning example of Capcom combining a short personal story with a solid scare, a winning combination which helped ensure files became a series staple. Early on in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, it becomes apparent something is very wrong, beyond the obvious viral outbreak turning everyone into horrifying creatures, that is. As Jill Valentine wanders the zombie-infested streets of Raccoon City, she occasionally comes across fellow STARS member Brad Vickers, who always seems to be in quite the hurry. Eventually, Jill catches up with Brad. Shaking like a leaf, he fills her in on what exactly has been happening.
Listen. He's coming for us. We're both gonna die.
What are you saying?
You'll see. He's after STARS members. There's no escape.
Capcom then leaves just enough time for the anxiety to fully settle in before anything actually goes down. The expectation is that you'll meet whoever Brad was talking about almost immediately, but you're instead forced to wait, an equal mix of anticipation and dread building with every passing minute. When Nemesis does finally smash his way onto the scene, his arrival is glorious in its brutality and unrivaled in its effect.
Jill!
Brad!
We've gotta...
Nemesis continues to play a pivotal role for the rest of Resident Evil 3, and you'll spend most of the game fleeing from him, but I don't think he would have been half as menacing without a debut which concludes with him killing another member of the STARS team. From minute one, Capcom makes it quite clear Nemesis isn't your run-of-the-mill biologically altered adversary, and his arrival remains to this day as distressing as it is unexpected. There were many who doubted whether Resident Evil 4's shift away from horror and towards action would pay off. Gone were fixed camera angles and pre-rendered backgrounds, replaced by a brand new over-the-shoulder perspective and a swagger unseen in previous entries. To assuage those concerned, Capcom needed to demonstrate why such drastic changes were a good thing early on in 4, and boy did they deliver with its frantic opening set piece. Arriving in a remote Spanish village, Leon Kennedy finds himself in dire straits with a seemingly endless parade of very angry locals out for his blood. There are few places to run and even less of them to hide in, your only goal to survive for as long as you possibly can. That's no easy feat either, especially with a chainsaw-wielding maniac on the loose.
What are they planning? They're gonna be... Chainsaw.
What makes this sequence so special is that it packs almost everything which made 4 such a mind-blowing experience into one tightly designed 5-minute stretch. The new perspective is used to great effect as you take advantage of the area's verticality, clambering up towers and fending off aggressors on rooftops. There's an unprecedented level of environmental interactivity, with you being able to, albeit temporarily, slow down your pursuers by shoving cabinets in front of windows and kicking down ladders. And the villagers chasing you behave far more realistically than any Resident Evil enemy prior, swarming you from all angles and reacting appropriately depending on where they're shot. It also concludes with a quip, which thankfully also made it into the remake, such is its popularity.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
If a developer created something like this introduction in the present, they'd rightfully be praised. For Capcom to do so back in 2004, at a time when third-person shooters were still in their infancy then, is mind-blowing. There are plenty of fantastic video game openings out there, but none evoke the same feeling of unbridled panic that 4's does. And with Leon off for a lovely game of bingo, Chris nursing a severely shattered hand, and Brad Vickers, well, dead, we reach the end of my list of Resident Evil's best moments. Do you agree, disagree, or did I mostly get it spot on? Let me know if you have a mo, as I'm sure I'll end up doing a follow-up in the not too distant future. And with that, thanks for watching the video, boys, girls and stars members. If you had a shockingly good time, do consider liking, subscribing and sharing your thoughts, and fingers crossed, we'll meet again soon.